Today, I want to talk about a problem that many of you are probably experiencing right now. Getting your drum buses to glue in your projects. I hear it time and time again in the comment section. My drum bus just won't glue. How do I fix it? You solo the bus and the kick and snare sound huge. Then you drop it back into the mix, hit play, and it all falls apart. The kick pokes out on one bar and vanishes on the next. The snare jumps 3 dB above everything around it, and your punchy kit suddenly sounds like a stack of separate samples instead of one instrument breathing in one room. For those unfamiliar with the term glue when applied to a drum bus, if you hear each part of the drum clearly isolated, that's not glued. On the other hand, if they sound like one tone smoothly transitions to another, as if it were one multifaceted instrument playing like a beautiful piano chord made up of individual polyphonic tones, you've achieved glue. In music production, gluing means making separate audio tracks sound like they were recorded at the same time, in the same room, played by one drum. It turns a collection of individual sounds, kick, snare, hi-hats, cymbals, into a single unified drum kit. Without glue, your drums might suffer from these sonic issues. Separation, the kick feels like it's in the foreground while the overheads feel miles away. Volume spikes, the snare might suddenly jump out too loudly, breaking the groove. Lack of vibe, the track sounds like clean, clinical digital samples rather than a living, breathing performance. For 65 years, engineers have reached for one box to fix exactly that. A 6-rack space monster around 65 pounds stuffed with 20 glowing tubes, the Fairchild 670. And right now, you can load 2 very different versions of it onto the same stubborn drum bus. Universal Audio's long-standing Fairchild tube limiter collection and Softube's brand new bus processor 670. So here's the promise. By the end of this video, you'll understand the actual engineering that makes a Fairchild glue a mix. The vari-mu tube trick, the lightning-fast tube-powered sidechain, and the mid-side matrix hiding inside. Then we're going to put both plugins on the same music, level matched and blind measure them on screen and land a real verdict. Does the Softube beat the legend, or just sound different? And here's the fun part. You're going to be the one to take the test. When we get to the demos, I'll play both 670s blind, and your job is to guess which is which, and which one glues better. Keep score as you watch, because I'll reveal the answers at the end. Before the deep dive, here's a quick taste of what that box does to a raw drum kit. Listen to the kit go from loose and spiky to glued and punchy. Did you hear how the whole kit locked together and moved as one? That's what we're chasing today. And we're going to find out which 670 does it better. To understand why this box glues like nothing else, you have to go back to the 1950s. The Fairchild was designed by an Estonian-born engineer named Rain Norma. Norma had already built custom mixing consoles for jazz recordist Rudy Van Gelder and for the guitarist and inventor Les Paul. The story goes that it was Les Paul himself who pushed Norma to build an all-new compressor limiter, something that could catch fast peaks cleanly without audible clamping down. Les Paul happened to be friends with a wealthy industrialist named Sherman Fairchild. Fairchild heard the compressor, licensed Norma's design, and hired him as the chief engineer at Fairchild Recording Equipment Corporation. Norma hand-built the first 10 units himself, and the very first one went to Rudy Van Gelder, who used it to cut lacquer masters for Blue Note Jazz Records. The mono version was called the 660, the stereo sibling. The one we're really here for was the 670, and both arrived around 1959. Now, the 670 didn't arrive in a vacuum. By the mid-50s, there were already respected tube limiters out there. The Gates Star Level, the RCA BA6A, and the Collins 26U. So what was missing? Two things. Speed, a clean attack fast enough to catch a transient before it got away, and crucially, for its original job, true stereo control for cutting vinyl. Cutting a stereo groove means managing lateral, side-to-side motion against vertical, up and down motion, or the cutting stylus literally jumps off the groove. The 670 had a matrix built in to handle exactly that. That combination, surgical speed plus true lateral, vertical stereo control, is why Norma built it and why nothing else quite did the job. And then the records happened. Over at EMI's Abbey Road, an engineer heard Fairchild in action at Capitol Records in the States and brought units back to London. Those 660s became the secret sauce behind some of the most famous drum and vocal sounds ever recorded. Geoff Emmerich's explosive drum tone on The Beatles, Tomorrow Never Knows, ran through a Fairchild. The point is that this is one of the most important pieces of gear in recording history, which raises the real question: how do you fit 65 pounds of glowing tubes into a plug-in, and who did it better? Let's get into the part no one else shows you, why it sounds the way it sounds. Most compressors, use a separate part to turn the volume down. A VCA chip, an optical cell, or a FET. The Fairchild does something different and much more musical. It's a vari-mu design, which means the tube itself is the control value. As the signal gets louder, a control voltage shifts the bias on the tube's grid, and that gradually bends how much the tube amplifies its transconductive downward. That gentle curve bend is the compression. There's no clap, no snap. The gain just eases off. And because that curve is baked into the tube itself, the ratio isn't a fixed setting. It starts gentle around 2-to-1 and steepens all the way towards 30-to-1 on the hardest peaks. That's the first ingredient of the glue. Here's the geeky payoff, and I absolutely love this. The tubes at the heart of these designs are described by how many electrodes they have. A pentode has 5, and here's the etymology rabbit hole. That ode ending comes from the same Greek root as electrode, anode, and cathode, which is hodus, meaning a way or path. Faraday literally named the electrode after the path the current takes. So a pentode really is 5 electrodes, but dig into the roots and you get a beautiful mental image. Pent, 5 plus hodus, path. 5 paths for electrons. The Fairchild's gain cells use special remote cutoff tubes, RCA 6386s, where the control grid is wound with variable spacing so the gain bends down gradually instead of slamming shut. The winding trick is the whole secret. And there isn't just one of them. The 670 runs 4 of these 6386s per channel, 8 tubes in all wired push-pull. So the gain reduction is shared across a whole bank of tubes instead of leaning on a single bottleneck. Second ingredient is speed. The 670 puts a powerful tube amplifier inside its own sidechain, so it can drive those bias grids almost instantly. The quickest time constant setting gives an attack down around 0.2 of a millisecond, 200 microseconds. That's quick enough to catch a snare transient without a slow rectifier stage getting in the way. And powerful is literal here. Norma built the sidechain like a miniature guitar amp, right down to a pair of 6973 output tubes. the kind that would push 15 or 20 watts into a loudspeaker. Here, there's no speaker. Instead, they slam control voltage straight onto those tube grids, and that muscle is exactly why it reacts so fast. Third, the release isn't one setting, it's program dependent. There is a 6-position time constant control, and the last 2 positions actually change their behavior based on the music. Fast recovery for quick transients, long multi-second recovery for sustained levels. That's why it breathes with a mix instead of pumping against it. The fourth ingredient, the one built for those vinyl lathes, a transformer matrix that splits your stereo signal into mid and side, lateral and vertical, and compresses them independently. That's built-in mid-side processing in a box from 1959. It's a huge part of why a Fairchild glues the center of a mix while letting the sides breathe. So how do our contenders recreate all of that? Both model the same core, input gain, threshold, and that 6-position time constant switch. And here's a detail worth knowing before you touch either one. The original hardware had no output or makeup gain knob at all because the tubes themselves set the level. You dialed in compression by writing input and gain thresholds together. Push the input for more glue and more color, then balance the threshold to land back at unity. Both plugins add an output control the hardware never had, genuinely useful, but a modern convenience, not vintage behavior. So if you're chasing an authentic Fairchild move, set your tone with input gain first and treat output as a string. Universal Audio's Fairchild Tube Limiter Collection is the long-standing reference. UA first shipped a Fairchild plugin back in 2004, and then in 2013 rebuilt it as the collection. The first version to model the complete tube amplifier and the transformer path based on a circuit model of Ocean Way Studios' meticulously kept golden reference units. It's the purest take. What the hardware does, modeled end to end. Softube's bus processor 670 takes the same vari-mu DNA and modernizes it. It gives you separate tweakable tube and transformer saturation, plus a collaboration control that runs from cleaner than the hardware through the coloration of a typical unit all the way to a worn one that adds substantial distortion. Then it adds the stuff a 1959 box never had, an air control up top, a mono-based control to tighten your low end, stereo width, a switch between modern and classic compression behavior, and a sidechain you can shape 3 ways, a low cut, a tone shift, and a stereo link. Same modern toolkit. If you're getting some value from this video, please let me know by clicking the like button. Also, subscribe to the channel if you wish to see more videos like this. Don't forget to click on the notification bell so you'll be alerted each time I post a new video. We've got a lot to cover in the future, so stick around to see those. And if you want to go deeper on the Fairchild, then we can go here, the full history, the vari-mu tube science, right down to how the control grid is physically wound, the mid-side matrix math, and exactly how the tube-powered sidechain engages, all of it. I've put together a free deep dive pack with flashcards and a quiz to lock it in. The link is in the description. So now that you have all the details of what the controls do, let's bring the plugins up on screen and dive into the demo. But instead of a knob-by-knob tool, I'm going to run a fair fight. The same music through both 670s matched to the same gain reduction, the same loudness, and comparable saturation, so you can judge it blind. Before every pass, I'll tell you the exact settings I'm dialing in and why. And we'll keep the meters and analyzers up on the screen so you can see what each one is doing, not just hear it. That way, you don't just notice a difference. You know exactly what changed and why it matters. And here's how to play along. As we go through the 2 tests, decide for yourself which pass is the UA and which is the Softube, and which one glues better. Then drop your pick in the comments. Before we get to the reveal at the end, Provide a comment with your choice before scrolling down and reading anyone else's comments. Let's dive in and take a closer look. First up, the hero test, a raw drum bus, no processing. Here's the honest way to do this. On both plugins, I'm dialing in the same three things, and I'll tell you what each one is and why. 1. I bring up the input gain until I'm seeing about 3 dB of gain reduction on the loudest hits. That's enough to hear the glue without strangling the kit. 2, I'm going to set the time constant to position 1 on both, the fastest attack paired with the shortest release. So the compressor fully recovers between hits and goes back to work on every single bar instead of sitting there like a static pad. That's what lets you actually hear the character of each box instead of just a level change. It's also the one position where both manufacturers describe the same behavior, which makes it the fairest possible head-to-head. And worth being straight with you, these two plugins don't publish the same times for every switch position. So this is matched position for position, not millisecond for millisecond. 3, I loudness match them and not with the output knobs. Both plugins stay at 0 output, and I let mCompare measure the dry bus and set each one to match it. Because if one is even slightly louder, your ears will call it better every single time. One more thing, and I want to be upfront about it. The Softube has a saturator section that the UA doesn't have, and I dialed it in to match. So this is a genuinely fair fight. Same gain reduction, same time constant, same loudness, comparable saturation. So the only thing left to judge is where each one puts that color, and I'm running it blind. Listen for one thing on the kit. Does it glue into one punchy instrument? And does the snare keep its crack or get dulled? First, the dry bus, then 1670, and then the other. Did you catch the difference? Here's what those screens are telling you. That extra second and third harmonic stacking up on the analyzer is harmonic distortion coming off the tube stages. That's the warmth you're hearing, and it's added color, not EQ. On the scope, that's the snare transient. Watch whether the attack tip stays sharp or gets rounded off, because that's the line between punch and mush. Both of them light up down in the 20 to 40 hertz region, but they do not earn it the same way. One of them makes that low frequency lift feel like weight you can actually lean on. The other hits just as hard, but it comes back brighter and more polished on top. And the null test shows you exactly where they part company. What's left when you flip one of them over is the difference between the two. And it's quiet right up until the snare hits. On the sustained material, these two agree almost completely. Where they separate is the attack. And that's exactly where your ears is most sensitive. That's why they know this cleanly and still don't sound the same in a blind test. And it means the question isn't which is louder, it's which one keeps the bright while still gluing the kick. Drop your guess in the comments below before the reveal. Which one was the Softube, which was the UA, and which glued the drums better? Now, let's make it harder. This time, it's a fuller band: drums, bass, guitar, and keys. Because the real test of a Fairchild is what it does to a whole mix bus, not just drums. Same method, and here's what I'm changing and why. First, I'm not changing the gain reduction. It stays right where it was at about 3 dB. Change the depth and the timing at the same time, and you'd have no way of knowing which one we're hearing. So only one thing moves in this test. And let me get ahead of something here because somebody is going to bring it up. 3 dB is not where I tell you to start on your own mix bus. In a real mix, I'd start somewhere around 1 to 2 dB and work up from there until it feels glue instead of squeezed. But I'm not mixing, I'm testing. I need enough gain reduction for you to actually hear the character of each compressor, and I need it matched to the drum test, so the only thing that changes is the time constant. Second, I'm moving the time constant to position 6 on both. On each unit, one of the two program-dependent settings where the release reacts to the music instead of running on a fixed timer. But here's something worth noting. Position 6 is actually a label on a switch, not a specification. Read both manuals and they don't even agree on what it does. One of them makes position 6 the slower attack of the pair. The other makes it the faster one. So when I put both switches on 6, I'm doing exactly what you do, matching the markings. And part of what you're about to hear is how differently two companies read the same switch on the same classic circuit. And that's why that switch matters here. The same 3 dB behaves nothing like it did on the drums. Position 1 grabbed every hit and let it go. Position 6 rides the whole band and breathes with it. Same number on the meter, completely different behaviors. Loudness matched through M-compare again. Output still at 0. Saturation still matched. Still blind. Listen to how the whole band settles in together and watch the release on those last two time constant positions moving with the music. Hear how the whole band settled into one cohesive picture? Here's the proof on screen. Now, watch the envelope over time. White is the dry mix bus. Red is that same bus through the compressor. And you need both of them there because you can't actually see compression. Nobody can. All you can ever see is a compressed signal sitting next to an uncompressed one. The dry trace is the ruler. Watch where red pulls away from white. On the loud materials, it's tucked well inside. Call it about 3 dB at the peaks. And that's the compressor leaning in hardest. Then, as the passage thins out, the two traces close back up. And here's the part I want you to catch. If I had simply turned the volume down, red would sit at the same distance inside white the whole way across. It doesn't. It moves with the music. That's the program-dependent release working, not a fixed setting. And it's why a Fairchild breathes with a mix instead of pumping against it. And that's genuinely different from most of what you own. Nearly every compressor on your drive has a release knob. You pick a number, and that's the number every time, whether it's a snare or a string pad. This circuit doesn't have one. The release falls out of the program itself. Quick on a transient, a lot slower when the level just sits there. You're not dialing in a time. You're dialing in a behavior. There's a whole second layer I'm deliberately not opening up today. Both of these can compress mid and side separately. That lateral vertical matrix I showed you earlier, that's a different setup and a different video of its own. All right, before we score it, Let's review what you were actually listening to. I kept the labels consistent across both tests. So pass A was the same plugin every time, and so was pass B. So how did you do? Tell me in the comments whether you called it right. And if you didn't, that's kind of the point. These are close. So who wins? We score it on camera, and tone and authenticity carry the most weight. Here's where I've landed, and it's nuanced on purpose. Matched for saturation and matched for loudness. These two land in genuinely different places. The UA came back brighter and more polished. It hits the low end just as hard, but there is more shimmer sitting on top of it. That is a rock record, and that is a pop record all day long. The Softube is the darker of the two, and to my ears, it earns that low frequency lift rather than just producing it. There's a little more punch down there. If I were putting one of these on hip hop or R&B, it would be the Softube. So, if what you want is authentic reference-grade Fairchild tone, the sound of the hardware modeled end-to-end, the UA is still the one to beat. If you want that same glue plus modern control, saturation you can shape, stereo width, and air control, and a mono-bass control all built for working in the box, the Softube pulls ahead. And one more thing on value, because it is the first question in every comment section. As I record this, these two cost exactly the same, and prices on both of them move constantly. So check before you buy either one. But here is what does not show up on the price tag. The UA purchase is not one plugin, it's two. The collection gives you the Stereo 670 and the Mono 660, the same circuit in its single channel form. So if you want a Fairchild on a monovocal chain as well as your stereo bus, that is more box for the same money. It's not that one is better, it's that they're built for two different producers. The blind test tells you which tone you prefer. The feature set tells you which workflow you need. Put those two answers together and you'll know which one is yours. The takeaway: the Fairchild glues because of four things working together. Variable mu tubes that ease gain down instead of clamping it. A two-powered sidechain fast enough to catch transients. A program-dependent release that breathes with the music. And a mid-side matrix that holds the center while the sides open up. Both plugins capture that. The UA leans authentic. The Softube leans flexible. If this helped a mix finally glue, do me a favor and send it to one producer friend who's still fighting their drum bus. And I really do want to know, in that blind test, which 670 did you pick? And were you a UA purist or a Softube modernist? Tell me in the comments. Don't forget to grab the free Fairchild 670 Deep Dive pack with the flashcards and the quiz. Link is in the description. Remember, none of us start off as professionals, but we all become pros through practice and knowledge. I'm Ken. Catch you on the next one.